your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about without ruling lies, or being hated, don't give way. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your man, if you can meet the triumph and disaster, you treat them just the same.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today we have a bit of a different video, of course, as the title implies, going over guns for fathers and sons. Now, before we get too far into the video, a couple things to get out of the way right at the beginning is that for the longest time, a year or two at this point, my wife has actually been doing most of the intro shooting for the channel. So all of the cool footage that you have seen over the past couple of years has been from her. Now, she's also pregnant with our second child, so as of this point she is no longer doing that. So first off, I would like to say a big thank you to you, Promise, and we'll go ahead and give her a moment of applause. That, of course, being said, almost all of the footage you'll see going forward will be static footage sitting on top of a tripod, so on and so forth. Now, with all of that out of the way, this is a bit of a different video. So recently I had a gentleman reach out to me. He basically wanted to get prepared with a series of upper receivers from me, because of course I build upper receivers, and he wanted to get himself and his family ready for whatever it may be, because of course the best time to get prepared was yesterday. Now, this gentleman actually commissioned a series of builds for me, so we actually have 4 different uppers to go over. Now, a lot of the components you'll see from my other builds, because the impotence for these builds was actually my Recce Pro, which this one here that we currently see is very similar to my 13.7 Recce Pro that I would normally sell on my website if I could ever keep them in stock. So today we're going to be going over the what of the 4 upper receivers, what they are actually, and then hopefully some of the why as well, to maybe give you guys a little bit of direction in some of your own personal builds, because of course the most important thing when building anything for a specific purpose is to know what that purpose is so that you can accomplish that goal that you set out. So starting out with this specific upper receiver, there are actually 2 identical upper receivers, so we ordered 2 of these. This is a 13.7 Rosco Purebred barrel, which is an exceptional barrel. We will get into accuracy testing and performance later on, but they perform extremely well, which is why I also use these in my Recce Pro builds as well. So we have a 13.7 416 stainless steel barrel, mid-length gas system with a .081 gas port size, or actually, sorry, a .078 gas port size on the stock purebreds. However, for this specific customer, he is going to be using suppressors on most of his builds at one point. So they all come with A2 flash hiders, because they will eventually be swapped out for suppressor mounts anyway. So an A2 flash hider is perfectly fine for the time being. Now, because of that, he wanted the tunability to be able to run basically whatever he wanted at any given time, whether that be steel cased, M193, or anything in between. So these barrels are actually all opened up just a little bit. and then we throw on an adjustable gas block. The adjustable gas block that we want for this is actually the Breek Arms adjustable gas block. This is my first experience with them. The adjustment methodology is very similar to the Superlative Arms without the additional bleed off feature, but again, the adjustment methodology is very similar. And of course, the Breek gas blocks actually come pre-tapped for a pin, and basically any upper receiver that I put out will have a pinned gas block. So these are a dimpled barrel, of course, so you have 2 set screws on the bottom, one in a dimple, one not, both high temperature thread locked to 450 degrees at 30 inch-pounds, and then of course a solid steel pin in there as well, so that that gas block never comes loose on you. Now, when you do throw on an adjustable gas block, adjustable gas blocks tend not to be 100% efficient. Usually there's some loss of gas there, so you do need to open up the gas port a little bit, depending on the barrel, of course, so that you have a little bit of extra headroom. So I think I opened up this gas port size to 0.086, which is still not a terribly overgas system. It is overgas, but not terribly overgas for a 13.7 mid, but that gives us more than enough headroom. So as you'll see in the intro, we were able to shoot steel case through all of these different upper receivers, as well as tune them very softly for high powered ammunition. And in the future, when he's throwing on his personal suppressors on here as well, he'll be able to get them all running very, very smooth. Now, moving back from there, we have currently our tried and true. These are our Toolcraft nickel boron BCGs. These have performed exceptionally well. I have over 100 of these in the wild currently without issue, and they are basically nickel boron, if you don't know, is a very, very hard coating, as well as it's very lubricious. So those two things combined make for a very good coating on your BCG. The BCG is entirely coated in nickel boron inside and out. And again, it is just a very high quality coating. Depending on who you talk to, some people will say titanium nitride is better. Chrome is always an excellent coating and an excellent option if you can get a full chrome BCG. The problem is, they tend to be much more expensive and they don't really provide much more value. They might be a little bit better, but again, you're talking about a very small percentage increase over the nickel boron BCG. So if you're familiar with my Recce Pros, you're going to be very familiar with this upper receiver. The main two differences are going to be the Breek adjustable gas block and the Cross Machine and Tool 12.5-inch Mod 4 rail. Now, talking about the rail for just a minute, I'm actually a big fan of Cross Machine and Tool rails. They make very high quality rails and components and designs, but their prices are not exorbitant like certain other rail manufacturers on the market. So of course, this is a 12.5-inch rail on a 13.7 barrel, which leaves very little barrel exposed. Now on this one here, the Mod 4 is going to be the 4-sided Picatinny at the end. Now we'll get into use case for this upper receiver a little bit later on. But you have 7-sided M-lock all the way down in the middle, and then of course you have your 4 Picatinny sections on top. You have a top Picatinny rail that is of course continuous, anti-rotation tabs, and a very nice steel-on-steel wedge lock system. Now, I'm a big fan of wedge lock. Wedge lock is going to be a lot stronger, provide a lot more concentric force versus a clamp-on style. So basically with the wedge lock system, you get concentric force around your barrel nut, combined with the anti-rotation tabs, mean that you get a very, very solid, very strong lockup to your upper receiver and your barrel nut, meaning that that rail has a very low chance of shift. Now, basically any rail on the market, if you hit it hard enough, as you've probably seen me do on the channel sometimes, it will shift, they will bend. They are, at the end of the day, extruded pieces of aluminum and not particularly strong. Now, the reason for the two identical 13.7 uppers, because there is again another upper receiver identical to this one in every way, other than the fact that it hasn't been filmed and hasn't been, you know, had all my stuff put on top of it. But where the clientele lives, it's theoretical that there could be shots up to 500 or 600 yards. The 13.7 barrel length is a very good do-it-all barrel length. Basically anything between 12.5-inch and 14.5-inch, in my opinion, are great do-everything barrel lengths. They're not too long, they're not too short, they still provide decent velocity even if you're using heavier bullets in 5.56, and the 13.7 is definitely capable of crushing it inside of 500-600 yards. Again, depending if you can back that up with your personal skills. So the 12.5-inch Mod 4 rail gives you more than enough rail space to mount your lights, lasers, bipods, iron sights, whatever it is that you need to put on this guy to be able to crush targets inside of 500 or 600 yards. Now, of course, there were two other distinct builds as well. Here we have a 12.5 inch. This is going to be very similar to one of my Mark V's. The main two differences on this build is that we have a 12.5 inch Rosco barrel. So this is a Rosco Bloodline barrel, which is of course their more hard use 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel barrels. Still very accurate, as we will get into later on, but they're going to have a significantly improved barrel life to 416R stainless steel, and they're still going to provide a good level of accuracy as well in more of a hard use application. So we have a 12.5 inch carbine length barrel. This one here again does have an adjustable break arms gas block, so it will shoot as softly or as harshly as you want and will basically cycle whatever you want. Most of the shooting that I was doing was using a carbine buffer, carbine spring, and we tuned it all the way down to where steel case was ejecting at around 3:30 to 4 o'clock, which is getting pretty close to the bleeding edge of reliability. Now on the inside, of course, we have a Toolcraft nickel boron BCG. We have a break arms Warhammer charging handle in the back, which is actually a nice, fairly inexpensive ambidextrous charging handle. Does have some gas defeating capabilities for suppressor work as well. Is true 7075 T6 aluminum and comes in at right at 1 ounce. Now the handguard on here is identical to what you'll find on our standard Mark V's as well. This is a Break 11.7 RG2S rail, which does have a very nice wedge lock system, which again is better than clamping. It's not necessarily the best bolting to the barrel nut and to the upper receiver as well, like you'll see on like Daniel Defense, their wrist rails and stuff like that, but it is still a very good, very solid lockup without going something crazy like that. Now on top of that, this is an 11.7 rail on a 12.5 inch barrel, so that barrel threads just barely protrude in front of the handguard. So basically whatever you're throwing on there, you still have enough clearance, but it's going to be very tight and very clean looking. We have M-LOK at the 3, 6, and 9, and of course a full Picatinny rail on top. Now a 12.5 inch, again, kind of as I mentioned earlier, is still good for just about everything that a 13.7 is good for, but just a little bit more skewed towards the short range CQB environment. Again, 12.5, if you still had to pick one gun for the rest of your life, depending on where you live, if you live in a wide open space, maybe you want a longer gun in general, but depending on where you live, if you can only have access to one firearm, a 12.5 is not a bad way to go. Now the last specific upper that we have to look at is a 11.5. Now you're going to notice a pattern here. You have two 13.7s, a 12.5, and 11.5. They're all good for the same things. Basically, the shorter you go, you take 1 point away from long range performance and you add 1 point to maneuverability and short range performance, if you will. The 11.5 is set up very similar. We have an 11.5 Rosco Bloodline barrel. We have a Break Arms adjustable gas block, Toolcraft nickel boron BCG, Break Arms Warhammer charging handle, and a 9.7 rail, which does expose a little bit more barrel. It would be nice to get a 10.5 inch rail. Unfortunately, 10.5 inch rails are kind of hard to source, again, depending on where you're going from. So there is a little bit of barrel exposed on here. Now, personally, I'm still a big fan of super short 10.3s and 10.5s for that sort of home defense or CQB role, or just to have a really fun, stupid short gun around. Most people, however, will agree, and rightfully so, that 11.5 provides a lot of benefits over the 10.5 or 10.3 with almost no downsides. It's an inch longer. It gives you 40% more dwell time, which is going to help you with reliability and properly gassing the system. And of course, this one here has an adjustable gas block, so again, you can tune it to whatever you want it to be. Suppressor work is going to be just fine on this guy. And most importantly, on the 11.5 versus the 10.5, 10.3, is that with the 10.3 and 10.5, you're basically on the bleeding edge of getting 5.56 to fragment and expand properly, versus on 11.5, you're not only giving yourself a little bit more headroom, you're pushing out that maximum terminal effectiveness out to from, say, 50 yards with a 10.3, 10.5, all the way out to maybe 75 or 100 yards. And again, for most people, in most realistic use case scenarios, that is going to cover the vast majority of encounters that you're ever going to have or to come up with in your head. Now, I actually know a lot of people who say 11.5 is their favorite barrel length, and if they had to choose one, it would be an 11.5 upper. And again, 11.5 basically does everything that a 10.5 does, just better. Now, All of these builds are basically variations on one another. The most specialized is going to be the 13.7. There's 2 of them. They have a little bit of added performance when it comes to the rail for the strongest mounting options. Now, I do think that the 13.7s will end up kind of being the main squeeze, as they are tuned a little bit more towards accuracy with the 416 stainless steel barrels, and they are going to be very pleasant to shoot. They're still going to provide you long range performance without being too long or too heavy. They're going to have all of the strong mounting options that you could ever want. Picatinny is stronger than M-LOK. You never have to tighten Picatinny down to your rail like you would with M-LOK. And also with M-LOK, you don't want to mount anything zeroable on them, because again, over time, that will probably to most likely shift, especially if you actually get out there and use them in more austere environments. Now, getting into the accuracy of these builds, I did accuracy testing on this specific 13.7 as well as the 12.5. I didn't really do accuracy testing on the 11.5, as it's the exact same barrel, just an inch shorter, so it's going to be within the margin of error of barrel to barrel in terms of overall accuracy. Now, we tested 3 different match loads. I had some HSM 77 grain, some Atomic 77 grain, and some Nosler 77 grain. Now, for a little bit of backstory, HSM 77 grain, their Sierra Match King loads, I think is what they are, have been performing very well in basically every gun that I've tested them in. Atomic has been performing pretty mediocre, I would say, so I probably won't buy that ammo again. And Nosler also performed pretty okay-ish for a match ammo in most of my guns. However, the Rosco barrels absolutely loved the Nosler load. So I tested these uppers back to back. Now, the accuracy testing that you'll see is at 50 yards. Now, why at 50 yards? Well, because this one here was being tested with a 3X micro prism, or not a micro prism. This is definitely a macro prism. I do have another micro prism that I need to do some more testing on, but this is, of course, the Swamp Fox Tri-Hawk, which is a 3X prism. It's a great prism, but it's pretty large and pretty chunky. Now, I wouldn't want to do accuracy testing at 100 yards with a 3X prism, because then I'm not able to quite refine my point of aim quite as well as I could be as if I had like a 2.5 to 10 or a 4 to 16 or something like that. So I limited myself to 50 yards. Now, the good thing about accuracy testing though is it really doesn't rely on distance. For instance, a half MOA at 50 yards is a half MOA at 100 yards, is a half MOA at 200 yards. Obviously the group size gets larger, but again, it doesn't actually the MOA depending on what distance you measure that group. And again, with a short range optic like this, makes it a little bit easier for me to have a more consistent point of aim, and therefore tighten up my groups a little bit. Now, on the 12.5, I believe it was tested with the SIG Romeo 8T and the Vortex 6X micro magnifier. It's not really a micro magnifier, but it is a 6X magnifier. They were both tested at 50 yards. Now, with the HSM ammunition, like I said, we were able to get around an MOA and a half or so, which is still good. And I believe there was one flyer in there that could have tightened up our group significantly. Maybe it was me pulling one, maybe there was a legitimate flyer in the group. Both of the atomic loads provided decent accuracy, again, maybe 1.5, maybe 2 MOA. And then both of the Nosler groups printed basically 1 hole, which is coming in at sub MOA. Now, again, if we back this up to 100 yards, the group does open up a little bit and they are no longer touching, but it's still sub MOA, because again, accuracy testing or MOA is transcendent of distance, and a half MOA at 50 yards is a half MOA at 100, 200, so on and so forth. So overall, I'm extremely happy with the accuracy I was able to get out of them. Again, with a specific load, that Nosler 77 grain really seemed to do well in both of the Rosco barrels that I tested them in. And I was able to take both of these uppers, again, on that very same day, out to 500 yards using just steel case crappy ammunition. Wasn't the easiest thing to do in the world with wind and having, you know, not necessarily high magnification scopes, but even with a red dot magnifier and a 3X prism, I was definitely able to get the job done. Again, it doesn't really matter as long as you have the right ammunition, the right skills to back it up, the right info, the zeros all locked down, you're gonna have a good time getting these guns out to distance. So if you were to ask me today what barrel length you should buy, what handguard, what upper receiver you should get, the first thing and the most important thing when talking about gear is that it matches your specific use case scenario. So most guns, most uppers should probably be in a more general purpose role, something that can do a little bit of everything. But if you're looking for something more specialized, you got to ask yourself, does this component that I'm adding to my cart actually help me achieve that goal? Is this a night fighting gun? Is this a dedicated suppressed gun? Is this a retro build that looks cool, you know, and it doesn't really have a purpose outside of that? There are lots of different things that you can do with a gun, and for most people, again, you probably want something that can flex a little bit into everything, something with probably an M-lock rail, not too heavy, something between a 12.5 and a 16-inch barrel is going to get you more than enough performance in almost every circumstance you can think of. But the most important thing when selecting any piece of gear is that it matches your environmentals, your use case scenario, your body dynamics, what have you. If you really, for some reason, are weight limited, you probably shouldn't be throwing on a heavy barrel and a 15-inch quad rail on your 24-inch bull barrel precision rifle. Probably shouldn't be doing that if it's not something you can actually physically run. But the most important thing, of course, is always going to be practicing with your stuff and getting proficient in general with firearms and what have you. And that way there, anything that you have, even if it's not perfectly suited for your given circumstance at any moment, your skills should still be able to carry you through and provide a high enough level of performance no matter what it is that you specifically have on your rifle and fine tune. You can always get deeper and deeper into the weeds on your build, but at the end of the day, if your skills haven't changed to take advantage of any of those performance improvements that may or may not come from changing out your gear, then it's not going to matter all that much. So at the end of the day, guys, I hope that this video was helpful for some of you, and let me know what you guys think of the part selection in general, if there's things that you would have changed one way or the other. Now, I know not all of us are working on infinite budgets. I can't afford everything that I personally want, so there are always some sacrifices made in that realm as well. But if you didn't know, a kind gentleman, a kind follower of the channel, actually recently started up a Discord for the channel. So if you're into aggressive, cancerous talk, then you can, of course, go on there and ask questions and get made fun of by an entire community of incels. But with all that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of these upper receivers in the comments down below. And with all of that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Peace off. Switch of angles there. Well, there it is, there's it. Nice, I'm actually very happy with it. Out of the recce, or not the recce, the 12.5 custom, Sigrom U8T, obviously excellent, and then Vortex 6X micro does okay.